Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Stock Market Today. You have Alyssa Corum here, and I am joined by Ed Carson. It's Friday, so we're going to go a little bit more in depth on the technicals for the market action this week, and we're also going to take a look at two interesting stocks on our radar, Novocure and Qorvo. But Ed, kick us off with a look at a daily chart of the NASDAQ in Thinkorswim with those candlesticks. What's the big takeaway for the week, you think? Oh, we have you on mute, but he's speechless after this week.
I'm sorry. Yes. Once again, the market was, the indexes sort of had a somewhat quiet week. I mean, there were some ups and downs. But while the indexes were sort of neutral, there was still a lot of action beneath the surface, a lot of big moves in sectors. Growth stocks came back into favor, including stay at home. I don't know if that's going to last or not. And there's still a lot of competing headlines. So, we still held up near highs. I mean, that's really all the major indexes held near highs. And there's some positive action among the kind of stocks that CanSlim investors tend to like.
That's right. This relatively quiet action, with the week capped off for the NASDAQ down just 0.4%, is good relief after some pretty volatile action that we've seen over the last couple of weeks. But good to see the tech heavy index recovering a bit after, I think, a bit of a scare with those vaccine headlines. We're still in that regression channel, but we would like to see a little bit more upward momentum, I think.
I think so, but it's like at the same time, there might be, there's not a whole lot of stocks to buy, really. I mean, we'll talk about some things that are sort of in position or not. And there are some, there always are, it seems like, but that there's a positive nature to it. There will be maybe some more setups if we go sideways for a little while.
All right, and let's get a little bit of a different perspective on the week with a weekly chart here, so you could see a very quiet week when you look at it from that perspective and compare it to the last 3 or 4 candles.
Yeah, and that's fine. It's a little bit. It was a little bit crazy back and forth, all this hope and fear that we were all experiencing over the last few weeks. So this week was a little calmer. And there was definitely some positive action underneath. So, I mean, not every week can be like these weeks, and that's probably a good thing.
Yes. All right. So now that we've taken a look at that, let's also check in on the S&P 500 on a daily chart here. We're going to flip on over to MarketSmith to show you that one to get a sense of the week here for the S&P. So a relatively quiet here as well. The S&P finishing down Friday's session about 0.7%, down about just 0.5% for the week, but it was an inside week, it looks like.
Yeah, and so again, it wasn't quite as strong. Some of the real economy stocks did well last week, not as well this week. But there was no real dramatic shifts either way. So we'll just have to see how that goes going forward.
All right, and you mentioned a lot of interesting stocks underneath the surface, so let's kick things over to a chart of Novocure, ticker NVCR, in the medical products industry group. This was our stock of the day on Thursday, had a really nice move today, up almost 6%, that above average turnover, and it flashed several buy signals this weekend.
That's right, and one of the issues that it bounced off the 10-week line fairly well. This is the 50-day line, but on a weekly chart, it bounced off the 10-week line. I'll show that in a little bit. Did that. Then on Thursday, it came up toward here. So that would have been buyable just on its own. When you go up off the 10-week lines for the first or second time, that's buyable. Well, then we went through this downward sloping trend line. That can be a way to get an early entry. And so today it went through that. And so that was a buy point, entry. And then this is one more, like a little bit of resistance area right here. It's sort of in range from all three. It's just nice to seeing that kind of situation from the 10-week line. Even with the strong move, it's still only 7% above that. So you could argue that it's viable from all those areas. And so we saw a lot of that this week. There's a lot of software makers that made this similar type of moves off their 50-day line and through trend lines.
Yeah, and we have earnings out of the way until late February, it looks like. So that risk is off the table. And when you go back to the daily chart, just really quickly, if you look at the bottom and you see that volume today, that really stands out and is a very positive sign.
That's a great point. And also, just below that, you can see some of the fundamentals. There's some pretty strong growth. It's just been turning profitable. As I said, this is a New America story this week.
Hmm.
And so, as the story talks about, there's a lot of studies that are over this year and next year that may vastly expand this company's reach. It does products, it uses electrical fields to disrupt cancer, and it's used for like a couple types of cancer, but it might be able to expand to a lot more, which would vastly expand its market. So that's what people are betting on going forward.
Yeah, we highly recommend you checking out that New America article, whether it's in our weekly print or over at investors.com, because we're scanning the market based on those fundamentals. We want those strong numbers, those promising stories for high growth potential, and then we're timing with the technicals and the chart action. And speaking of, let's take a look at Corvo and see how that technical action is shaping up. It did finish off of its highs for the day, up about 0.4% or so, but saw a nice rebound off of the 21-day. And all of this recent action this week comes after a big move on earnings. And I think it's pretty impressive to see it really hold those gains and consolidate in a relatively tight fashion here, Ed.
Yeah, that's right. And Corvo, ticker's QRVO. What it has here is it's closed tightly. This is actually, it closed really not much difference in the last 2 weeks. And so that's going to have what we call 3 weeks tight. It'll show up on MarketSmith later on after today in sort of this blue shaded area. And that would make this the high above this point in this high this week as a buy area. So the highest point in the 3 weeks tight is a little buy area. It's just above a prior base. So this would be an opportunity if it clears that to add shares or even start a position. One of the nice things about this is a 5G chip maker. It's an Apple chip maker. Those are kind of stocks. Those chip makers are coming to the fore, whether it's Qorvo or Qualcomm or Taiwan Semiconductor. These are all quality names that are outperforming right now.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And when you're talking about the 3 weeks tight pattern, you mentioned it being a chance to either start a position or add shares to an existing position. So when you see a breakout off of one of those alternate entries, I think you want to be buying a little bit closer to the buy point instead of giving it that room for that 5% chase zone. It's ideal to be buying as close to those buy points as possible. So we'll see what the next week brings for Corvo, but it's definitely one of the stocks on our radar. And Ed, if you could flip on back to the NASDAQ daily chart so we can give our thoughts to the audience for our game plan for the week ahead based on the action that we saw this week. You mentioned that there aren't a lot of great bases or buy points out there at this time. So what should investors be doing?
Well, one is there's nothing wrong with doing a whole lot of nothing if your stocks are working. I mean, there are stocks that had nice moves, either this week or last week. And if those things are continuing to move and they don't look crazy extended, that's fine. But you do want to evaluate your stocks. I mean, some stocks probably did quite well, some maybe not so much. There's been a lot of, fluctuation in the last few weeks, and that may continue. You want to analyze, see if you want to, pare some of those back, or if you're too exposed and, coronavirus shutdown plays. I mean, the stay at home, it's just, you want to, want to be careful. You want to be careful how exposed you are. And build your watch.
It's a good point because we saw what happened when that positive vaccine news came out. All those stocks got hit very, very hard. Zoom, Peloton, just to name a few. So I totally agree with you on that point about diversification or a little bit of caution and not just go in really heavy back into those names, because we do have a lot of unresolved headlines still out there, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to know. I mean, so, okay, you could say, well, the rotation's over. Well, maybe it is, and maybe we're not. But at the same time, in a few weeks, there's a very high likelihood that vaccinations are going to be starting. And, and that could quickly change. I mean, that will be a process over months, but still the stock market looks ahead. So, I don't know. I don't think anybody knows, but it's really hard to tell which way things are going to go in the coming months. So just, you have to be flexible in this situation, because we don't know what sectors and stocks are going to lead in next week or certainly over the next several months. So you definitely have to be flexible and nimble, but it is still a strong market.
Yeah, it is. And you mentioned building your watch list. So, what kind of things should investors be looking for when they're doing their screens of stocks? I mean, obviously, we want to be screening for those strong fundamentals, but maybe stocks that have been pulling back to their moving averages. How are they looking? What's on your mind in terms of building that watch list?
I think the most important, like looking for strong relative strength. I mean, looking for pullbacks to the 10-week line. Uh, Obviously, it's great if you can find stocks with great fundamentals that are setting up in bases, but it could be that real economy names, which some of which may still do very well, their fundamentals may look lousy the past few quarters. So
It's true.
you have to keep in mind is like, well, if the economy turns back on, you might expect the growth to resume, and so maybe like a Visa or something else, those kind of stocks you just sort of like, that's okay. That's okay. I understand that. So it's going to take some adaptability, even in just building your watch list in those kind of situations. Just look for promising in terms of relative strength, in terms of
Mhm.
pullbacks, strong technical action, and with strong longer term fundamentals.
Yeah, that's some really great perspective there, Ed. We really appreciate it. And thank you all for tuning in. If you want more in-depth market analysis and our take on stocks that are setting up and portfolio management strategies, make sure you're checking out IBD Live over at investors.com/IBD Live. Of course, it's our daily morning live stream where our experts are sharing their screens, getting really in depth. We also have a Q&A component, and we highly recommend it being an interactive thing and you submitting your questions. We have a lot of fun. We hope you join us. But that is it for today, everyone. Appreciate you tuning in, and we'll see you back here on Monday.